If you don't feel comfortable with the recording, feel free to disable your video. But otherwise, we are recording. Bob, please, you have the flight controls.
All right, thank you, Sasha. I appreciate the invitation, and thank you everyone for coming. Let me share my screen here, and let me get a chance to see you. Sasha teed up Agile Moose. It's not a really incredibly interesting story. I've been publishing stories and blogs and for a long time. And as I got older, I started jumping up on soapboxes more and writing content that I didn't think was always relevant for my business site or my business brand. And I said I need to probably have a soapbox persona. And I used to visit Maine I would vacation in Maine probably 3 times a year. I lived in Connecticut for decades, and Maine has a lot of moose, and I have a fondness for moose. They're incredibly large. I don't know if most people realize how large they are. And then in the back of my mind, as part of my persona, I was like, well, if you can teach a moose to be agile, you can teach anyone to be agile. And so I keep running with the brand. And there's things like the moose is on the loose. I'm going to the Agile conference, so I use that, for there. I have a lean coffee that we've been facilitating for a number of years, started in COVID, called the Moose Herd, that you're all welcome to. I'm fond of the moose. I have a moose picture behind me. My wife doesn't like that picture. She wants me to have a much more decorative picture there, but I can't help it. I just need the moose over my shoulder. So enough of the moose. Let's start talking about storytelling a little bit. And I'll dive in, or I'll try to dive in. So I think the genesis for this talk, the context here is coaches. I'm putting together a master class, a class for more experienced coaches to try to get us to up our level of coaching and to become more well-rounded in our coaching stances. And one of the modules that I developed, and this is one of the modules for that class, is trying to communicate to coaches how powerful storytelling can be for them with their clients. And in this case, it's the broad client. You could be coaching a team as a client. You could be coaching a leader as a client, whatever. And I also teach leadership workshops, and it's the same paradigm. I think leaders, to be stronger communicators, storytelling can be a very compelling way to lead, to envision, to share your vision organizationally. Now that being said, I think a lot of folks sort of suck at storytelling, and I want to just send not anyone here, but other people out in the universe. They struggle with storytelling, and all I want to do is not judge you. My hope in this talk is to inspire you to start a journey wherever you're at in your storytelling journey, and then to lean into it. And to start improving incrementally your storytelling, to just think about it. If you're a coach, if you're a scrum, whatever your role is, actually. Product owners, I mean, storytelling is incredibly, I've done a talk historically talking about product owners and how they can communicate their product vision via story as a starting point, not a user story, but literally a story. And they should start that way to really connect with their teams. The envision. So storytellers, I want you to start thinking about envisioning and painting a picture. I think part of this, when I'm telling a story, very often I'm trying to paint a picture. I'm trying to craft a visualization with folks if I can. I don't know how good I am at it, but that's my intent. My intent is to paint a picture. And you can see that here in some of these. If you notice the grayscale picture is a teacher with students around them. And you can see the teacher's leaning forward and the students are leaning in. And so part of that storytelling is drawing folks into your story, is welcoming them into the story. I like the storytelling, the persona of we're telling a story around the fire. I would love it if a product owner told in their mind, not physically have a fire in an office, a virtual or a real office, but in their mind, they had a fire and they were trying to draw folks into the fire. not but closer to the fire, closer to the story, to get engaged. The other thing is expressiveness. You can see that in the storyteller there. It's also body language and movement in the story. So really lean into the visualization when you're thinking about your past storytelling and maybe some of your future storytelling. Another way to think about storytelling, at least for me, and a lot of these folks show my age, so I apologize for everyone who doesn't know who these people are. You can look them up, though. You can look them up in Wikipedia. You can Google them. They do exist. I don't think there's anyone up here or they existed at least. But stories. Some of my favorite story singers are storytellers. Billy Joel. Some of these stories. I mean, when I hear Billy Joel's Piano Man, I smell cigar smoke and I smell stale beer in the air. I mean, literally, I don't think I'm the only odd person in the world that does that, but it evokes those feelings in me. It's almost like I'm there at the bar with him. Or Tracy Chapman, I just saw her at the Grammys with someone. They co-sung the song. I forget the young man's a country a country singer, and I was crying during that song. That I can hardly listen to Fast Car because it makes me cry. So I think part of storytelling is drawing emotion out, drawing connection. It can be Bob Dylan, Jim Croce, Harry Chapin. Some of these songs, these singers, these songwriters, bring that same emotion out. Movies, films, animated films to me, you can tell, in stories. Storks. I don't know if anyone, the bottom left hand um, picture is from Storks. I don't know if anyone's seen Storks, but there's a wolf pack in Storks. And I'll fast forward in Storks just to watch the wolf pack form. And it makes me laugh relentlessly all the time. Just the story, just this sense. I've watched the entire movie with my granddaughters, but that scene, I'll go back and I'll replay it. It's a wonderful story. Or Up. I don't know if any of you, again, an older movie, but it still evokes emotion in me, in the notion of storytelling. So everyone, I want you to be thinking, not in a grandiose way, but just uh, thinking about learning storytelling from observing film and listening to song and watching folks tell their story and become an observer of that. And what did they do? What did they do and how did they connect? There's something we're not going to talk about, but if you want to study aspects of storytelling, there's something called the hero's journey. And the hero's journey is like an archetypal sort of arc for a story. Star Wars follows the hero's journey, and that would be worth looking up, if you will, if you're interested in that. Think of it as a grand story arc, and that there's aspects to the hero's journey that you might find useful. I want you all to just stop, maybe close your eyes. You can turn the camera off for a sec, or not. I love seeing people, so it's nice if you want to come camera on, but you can turn camera off. And I want you to remember. I'm going to give you 60 seconds to remember when. And I want you to maybe go back to your childhood or a family story. It's even okay to have, those stories that your grandfather told you over and over again. The same, your grandparents told you the same stories over and over again. That's okay. Think about that. A personal or a professional story, a compelling news story that grabbed your heart, or a movie or a play that grabbed your heart. And I want you to how did it unfold for you personally? Not how were you told to, how did it unfold for you personally? What was its impact on you? And how did it make you, the most important question is, how did it make you feel? So just pause and sort of look for a story and play it forward in your mind. We're going to take like 60 seconds for that. And what you could do is jot down some notes. If you don't have a piece of paper, I want you to grab a piece of paper, either electronic or preferably physical, to jot some notes down. You may want to be grabbing some notes to yourself, or even articulating some story snippets, what I think of as story ideas or story snippets along the way. The other thing I want to point out in this slide, and I'm not going to have time for it, but there's academic studies that show, and literally human beings are wired to engage with story. The art of a story, and you can see it going back thousands of years in storytellers and shamans sharing stories, religious stories, etc. You can see it unfold, and it connects to the brain. It connects it. It sort of it has a dopamine effect, for example, in it. So storytelling activates the brain, and I'm sure if you go back, you'll forget the academics. I love a good story, and I'm sure all of you as well do. And it activates emotion and it activates connection. And you can think about it in your agile context and your leadership context. And the emphasis is, how does it make you feel? I want you to anchor on the feelings. What did it do to you? And then as you're unfolding and emerging in your storytelling, that's one of your goals. Is I want to connect to my audience. I want to connect to their feelings. There's a gentleman, Julian Stodd, who's I don't know how to characterize him. He's a writer in the UK. I don't think he's an agilist. I think he's a leadership whisperer. And I listen to him he writes on his blog, a daily blog, and I listen to him. I subscribe to him. And a few weeks ago, he was talking about we learn from stories. Someone shared a powerful story this morning that I really took to heart. But it's not like swallowing a pill. The learning is something that we do ourselves. It does not come prepackaged within the story. We understand what is given within our own individual context and through our own filters of experience, expectation, and culture. And so he has this 60 seconds each day of reflection. He's a reflection artist, and he motivates me to reflect. So that's one of the things he triggers me to reflect. And so use your 60 seconds to think of a story, but not just think of the story. What did it cause you to do? How did it cause you to reflect? Is the thing that it resonates with me. And it won't be, it doesn't have to. I think the best stories sort of resonate over time. So you may tell a story, Sasha, and if everyone's quiet, that doesn't mean you failed. Or if you got a round of applause, it doesn't mean you succeeded. You're planting the seed of a story, and it may land with some, and someone might actually resonate with it a week later or a month later, and you had an effect on them with the story. So don't look for an immediate reaction or an immediate result or an immediate value proposition. I mean, that's wonderful, and you may get some of that, but Julian is making that point, and the impact of the story is an individual responsibility. It's not the storyteller's responsibility. It's our responsibility to share the story. It's the receiver's responsibility to interpret it and to take action. Stephen Denning is relatively famous in the Agile community, I think. And he wrote this book, The Leader's Guide. I don't think a lot of Agilists talk about this, but he wrote this wonderful book that's not an Agile book. It's a leadership book called The Leader's Guide to Storytelling. And I think it's a fairly good. There's a bunch of books on storytelling, but it's a fairly solid treatment of storytelling, particularly from the lens of a leader. And I think it resonates with Agile coaches and Scrum Masters and Agilists as well, from that point of view, and product owners, product folks. And he talks about he changes story to narrative, and I like that transformation of story to we're narrators, right? We're unfolding narrative. The other thing that's interesting that he does is instead of just telling a story, he sort of assigns patterns to story. So stories have a point, they have a purpose. We decide how we're directing the story. And he gives us 8 narrative patterns to think about. Not all of them are relevant, To me, most of them are relevant to me. So motivate others to action. So as an agile coach or a change agent, you can direct your stories to motivate others. And again, you're influencing. We can't turn, everyone knows you can't motivate people up or down, but we can inspire them with our narrative. So using narrative to ignite action or to inspire new ideas. Build trust in you or build relationship in you. I would encourage all of you to ask yourself, how many stories am I telling about me? Like if you're an agile coach or an agile trainer, what is your genesis? You better be able to articulate, well, you better, that sounded threatening, but you should be able to articulate your genesis story, your why story, if that makes sense to everyone. Like, why are you doing what you're doing? And why are you relentlessly doing it? And I mean, you need to have that in your back pocket. I would encourage all of us to have sort of these back pocket or like a holster of story nuggets that we can pull out, and then we can target to an audience and a why story or build trust in me. Why should you listen to me? What is my story about my genesis? What's my story about my experience? What's my story about my failures? It's not just success patterns, but how have I failed? What mistakes have I made? Uh, Build trust in the company. You can talk about the company, the goals, the culture of the company. Value stories are incredibly valuable. What are your values? What are your ethics? What are your boundary conditions? I hear people talking about boundaries a lot nowadays. But a story could articulate them, or guardrails. And why? What is the story behind the guardrails? Why are they there? Right? What happens? What happens if you jump over the guardrail? What would be a story? You're destroyed. Your Volvo crashes, but it's a Volvo, so it's safe. So you weren't hurt, but your car was demolished. If you go over that, I do actually drive a Volvo, so there is a connection to that. I don't know how safe it is. I've never crashed it. Getting others working together. Stories, talking about what good looks like. I have a good friend of mine that she's an executive at S&P, and she talks about what good looks like. And Mary talks a lot. She tries to share stories that describe what good looks like, what a good team looks like, what a good product evolution looks like, what good leadership activity looks like. Right? She paints the picture. What good? Sometimes she paints what bad looks like. So it's not just all good. This is good. Like patterns and anti-patterns can be very useful. These are the boundary conditions. She does a nice job of that. Sharing knowledge. I wish more coaches, instead of asking lots of questions, maybe as part of mentoring or, sort of teaching, share knowledge via story. Yes, this is how I learned that story points are evil. I'm just kidding, everyone. I don't want to debate story point. Or this is how I
Ooh,
discovered
that's new.
that this is how I discovered that safe
Someone's
is
going up
evil.
and down the hill with a bobcat.
Well, that's great. Yes, the bobcat is jumping up over safe and eating it from the top down.
Sorry
No,
about that.
so that's okay. So sharing your knowledge, taming the grapevine, probably not that relevant, and then creating and sharing your vision, particularly if you're a leader or a change agent. Again, what does good look like from an organizational perspective? What is the vision? What is the large scale why? What are we doing? So I love Denning's sort of narrative patterns, and the book is worth a thought from that. I want you all to watch. You're all on the West Coast, so all of you have probably been overexposed to Steve Jobs. So I apologize for this reference anyway, and I'm sure all of you have seen this video 1,000 times, but I don't care. I'm going to ask you to watch it one more time. So he has a Stanford commencement address that he did. It's about a 15-minute video, and I share it in my leadership classes because I have a storytelling module for leaders, and I use it as a way to mine for storytelling tools and tactics. And I think that 15-minute video can be dissected into a master class for effective storytelling. And I'd like you to look at it that way. So watch that video and just capture some tools and techniques and approaches he used to connect to that audience. And then consider weaving them into your own toolbox. and practice some of those things. All right. So it's worth, and I love this quote: the most powerful person in the world is the storyteller. The storyteller sets the vision, values, and agenda of an entire generation to come. For those of you who are thinking, I'm reading Larry's mind, and Larry's thinking right now. He's like, I don't have any stinking time for storytelling. I need to get stuff done. I need to coach the crap out of people. We need to get result. We need to get outcomes. We have OKRs to meet, right? So and objectives, and I got to get paid. Damn it, I got to get paid. So and all of that's true, right? But at the same time, I think we all need to take time to build relationships, right? We're not just AI. We're not dealing with automatons. We're dealing with people, and we want to connect with people. And one of the most effective ways, and we want to build relationships with people. Denning Denning was talking. Denning was talking about that, and so storytelling. Take the time for storytelling. Take the time to practice it, and then run experiments in whatever role you're at, and then get feedback. Get feedback and self-reflect, and then improve. It's worth doing, regardless of your role. So some storytelling basics. I want to flip to some basics to think about. Anyone ever hear the Oreo cookie? Or tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. It's sort of an oldie but really goodie. I really like that. I talk about a storytelling arc, and really that represents the arc. And in fact, in Jobs' video, you can see him talking. He's applying that principle. That's one of the things that he does, and it's useful when you're storytelling to tell people where you're going to go. Now, don't tell them the conclusion you want them to come to. That's a terrible storytelling technique, right? You want the point to emerge. Everyone write that down, right? Don't tell people how to interpret your story. Let it emerge, but at the same time, give them some guardrails. The Pareto principle, or crossing the chasm, is don't try to tell your story to everyone. I think if you try to tell your story to everyone, you tell it to no one. So you know that crossing the chasm view, I think there's like a middle majority that you want to shoot for. And you want to target that to your audience. So if you have a Scrum team and there's a couple of folks that are, maybe new or defensive or not really buying it or whatever, you want to look at the middle of the team as opposed to the edges of the team. Connect to your audience in whatever way you can. The start of a story is good. I use humor. I try to connect. I use humor and I use vulnerability as a connection in the beginning of stories, and it works for me. Clarify and listen to body language. Now, find your humor. I like dad jokes. I don't know if anyone's familiar with the term dad joke, but dad jokes warm my heart. Dad jokes make me happy. So my humor is corny humor, but it works. It works. I think it endears people to me sometimes, or they feel sorry for me that I'm in a time warp. And that's okay, because I'm really just trying to connect to them. Add situational context or visualization that I'm talking about. A lot of times I'll try, if I'm talking about projects or what good looks like, I'll talk about a project. Remember when, like Doug Levitt, do you remember when? Do you remember Project Bob Galen? That the Bob Galen Scrum team. Do you remember when they crashed and burned? Their little hearts were in the right place, but then they had whip limit that was through the roof. And then they crashed, and bless their little hearts, they had 5 days of retrospective. But then one wonderful thing, and they failed this way, but then the recovery was wonderful. And what they learned was beautiful. They learned that they made 3 fundamental mistakes. So what I'm doing is trying to connect this story to real teams and real experiences that other folks can connect to. Let your points emerge. I made that. Be yourself. Don't try to be Sasha or Larry or Bob. Be you. One of the mistakes I made many years ago is there's a coach, Joanna Rothman. So when I was growing up as a consultant coach, I was looking for a role model, and Joanna Rothman was my role model decades ago. And And I'm no Joanna Rothman, but I tried to speak like Joanna, and I tried to write like Joanna. And if you actually looked at my original website, my website looked very much like Joanna's, but it wasn't effective. And it thank goodness it didn't take me very long to realize, to find me, right? And what I realized is I can't be Joanna, but I can be Bob. And just find that inner self and be myself. And that, I think that's a key to storytelling. You see that with Jobs. He's being genuine. You may not like his style. You may not like his leadership style. He has some thorny issues, but he's an effective communicator, and I think genuineness is a part of that. Now, there's types of vision. This goes back to so the patterns that we were talking about, but I think I wanted to extend the patterns. And one I talked about is Phoenix. I think a powerful story is a Phoenix rising story, if that makes sense. We made a mistake, we failed, but then this is how we recovered. I love telling organizational Phoenix rising stories, leadership team Phoenix rising stories, product Phoenix rising stories, team, individual. I've burned out and risen quite a few times myself. So I can tell them by myself. Success and failure stories. I know what you're thinking stories. Why should you care stories? Who am I stories? You should have a who am I, right? That's the why I was talking about. Genesis stories. How did you start? And people ask me all the time, and I try not to be canned with it, but how did you start in Agile? So in presentations, it's not uncommon. If I'm doing an Ask Me Anything, and I do quite a few of those, it's very common for someone to say, and the first question is, tell me why what was your journey like? What was the early days of your journey? And that's my genesis, and I'll explain the genesis. Sometimes I'll talk about growing up on a farm, if that makes sense to everyone. I grew up on a dairy farm in central Pennsylvania. So I'm from Pennsylvania on the East Coast. And I used to experiment. I was milking cows on farms. The entire family works on the farm at a very early age. So please don't report us to the Department of Labor, but many farm families, the kids work and contribute. And I was working at about 8 years old or so, milking cows. And I remember once I was very experimental, and I think I was 10 or 12, and I was driving a tractor. I had just been driving a tractor, a 3-wheel tractor, for the first time, which lacks stability. And in my mind, I wanted to run an experiment, and I'm like, I wonder what angle on the hill the tractor can navigate going forward, and what is the tipping point of the tractor? And so I went out on the fields and I found the tipping point, and the tractor toggled over, and my dad thought I killed myself. So he comes running out into the field, and then he killed me. When he found out that I was okay, then he actually then took some action on his own. But I've always experimented, is what I'm talking about, the art of experimentation. And I use some of these early stories sometimes to talk about how curious I am, and the power of curiosity and the power of experimentation. And it has nothing to do directly with Agile, but it does have something to do with me, and I think, sort of my affinity to Agile. So I'm just giving you an example of that. Now, please don't do that. If any of you go out and start playing around with tractors and seeing what the tipping point is, I have no insurance to cover it. I have no liability insurance, so you're on your own. Now, one of the things that I think you want to be aware of when you're telling stories is to target to your audience. Very often what I'll do is I'll have a core story. That little farm story I just told, I'll sometimes dust that off and tell it to a team. And the point might be curiosity, or the point might be experimentation. Does that make sense to everyone? I might dust it off and use it in a different way talking to leaders. If I find that leaders are into sunk cost thinking and are really adverse to curiosity and experimentation, I might try to jest a little bit in a lighthearted way, because there's a little bit of laughter in that story. So I may redirect that same nugget to leaders, but I won't tell it exactly the same way. So part of storytelling is, I think you need to be sensing and responding to your audience, and targeting and retargeting. So you have in essence a nugget, what I call a story snippet or a story nugget, but then you retarget it depending on the situation. I have about 50 nuggets that I use pretty regularly. And the farm, I have a series of farm stories that I use. I don't dust them off that often. I'm dusting them off tonight because I'm tired. And Sasha gave me some wine before the session, so I'm waxing philosophical about my childhood. But otherwise, I'll dust off some other nuggets. If someone asked me once in a conference, "Do your stories have to be true?" And I never got asked that. If one person has asked me that, and I'm like, I don't. I said, for me, I can't answer for everyone, but for me, they need to be close to true, because I forget. It's like I forget what I said. So if I'm making stories up, it's really dangerous. As a storyteller, you want to be consistent. You don't want to be telling one story with one point and then the next day tell another one. So I actually have every nugget has a basis of reality or truth, but I embellish the heck out of it. I'm an overactor. If you can't tell, I get a little bit passionate and I have a tendency to be overly dramatic, and I'll embellish to make the point, and very often, and I'll stretch the truth as much as I possibly can, because I think part of that is the art of storytelling, is to land your point, to make it memorable, to really connect with folks. So another way to adjust for your audience is pausing and then canvas. One of the things you'll see in the Jobs video is he really does a nice job of letting silence do its work. He'll let a point land, and then and he uses water. He takes a drink. In fact, and then he'll continue the story. And what's happening is it's landing, it's stewing, it's cooking, it's doing its work. Don't be afraid. So who can I pick on? I'm just picking on names. Irene. I've heard Irene say that you only tell a story once. And I would say, or you only make the point once. Don't repeat yourself. And I would disagree. I said the important points, don't be shy about repeating them. Does that resonate with everyone? The major points, if something is important, you'll see Jobs do this. He'll make not more than 3, but he'll repeat it twice or 3 times, depending on the impact. He's not telling folks what to think, but he's repeating the point because it's incredibly crucial to the arc. Having those core stories and retargeting is what I'm talking about. I would like you all to start jotting down, or even just thinking about it. What are some story snippets? Because one of the impediments to storytelling is folks are like, well, I have no stories to tell. Well, of course you don't. You need to create a database of story snippets in order to start mining them, to start telling some stories. Now, some of you have them, but then you want to build that over time. You want to build that index of stories that you use, and you can connect them. So start thinking about those stories, and don't tell me you don't have any. I won't accept that. That's an unacceptable story. You may have to observe, you may have to reflect more. Oh, one thing I want you to do, as much as you can, is I want you to weave you into your stories. Does everyone know what I want you to weave yourself. I want you to personalize the story. I want you to, I'm not saying make it about you, but what I'm saying is weave you in. Share something in your stories that's personal to you. Like I gave all of you a little snippet of my background. I grew up on a farm, etc. You now have a little bit of knowledge about who I am. And I can connect the dots over time so that we start building a relationship, not an agile relationship, just a human-to-human relationship, using storytelling as a sort of a vehicle to help with that. So make each of your stories share a bit of you. Think about showing vulnerability. That's one of the reasons I like Phoenix Rising stories so much, is they have a vulnerability aspect, particularly if you talk about mistakes you've made or failures you've made and what you've learned, how you've become. I think that's really compelling. Sasha, how have you become the coach that you are? What does that journey look like? Now, I don't want a 2 hour or a 3 hour film, Sasha. I mean, you want to share that in small snippets over time. So I read Sasha's face, everyone, and he's like, fantastic. I can now do a 3 hour film, the life of Sasha Pumpkin. And you may do that, but you want to do it in slices, like any good user story. You want to slice that story up over time. I want you all to think about storytelling as an arc. This goes back to the cookie, the Oreo cookie. Uh, and I like chess, a chess metaphor, which is opening moves, middle game, and end game for storytelling. And opening moves are things like tell them what you're going to tell them. That's what all those letters are. Set the stage. What you'll see in the Jobs video is he pokes fun at himself. He uses self-deprecating humor very early in the video as an opening move, and it's pretty effective. He actually shows vulnerability very early in the video to connect in a genuine way with the audience, and I think it works. Show vulnerability, seek immediate connection, and be willing to. You're reading your audience. If the joke didn't fly, you may want to try something else, or you may want to just let that dad humor go and ignore it. That's who you are. The middle game is sort of that hamburger patty in between the two buns. It's the meat of the story. It's tell them. So it can be sub stories. It can be snippets of stories. This is where you would make the pivot and start talking about the rising. Everyone with me? So the opening moves for a Phoenix Rising would be the failure. And then we would talk about the learning in the middle game. And then we would talk about how did we emerge learning? How did we evolve? And the end of the story might be, and the aha, this was the result that we saw. A fundamental delivery. We delivered value to the client. I think Larry was talking about value at some point, if I remember correctly. So we could do that. Passion, let your passion come through. Gain momentum. So I think part of middle game is building to a crescendo, building and allowing things to emerge. Let you shine through. It's the heart. And then the end game, I think the end game is the most important part from my point of view. Anyone have heard that term, that drop the mic? You can have a crappy opening move. Well, I mean, you want good opening moves, but you can lose it in the middle game. But if you stick the landing, I think usually you have a successful story. It's the landing, it's the point. Now, the whole story arc is important, but sticking the landing is absolutely critical. So the closing story, eye contact, look around. Another thing about the end game, don't try to fit too much in. I see a lot of scrum masters and coaches, they try to tell stories, but they have like 22 arcs. So they're telling a story that has 22 points in it. Does that make sense to everyone? They're like, the team is great and they've built high quality and we're doing this and they did this. And by the way, they're running around with an intent and they filled out Jira tickets beautifully. You can get, as a listener, you get lost in all of those threads. So I think it's important to have a single or at most two threads so that you can stick the landing on your point. Think of a thread as why are you telling story? What is the point of the story? What's the target? What do you hope to emerge? Let the point emerge, I said that. Leverage and pause silence. When you ask a question, questions can be very compelling throughout the arc, but allow some silence after the question. Just let it land, let it stew, let it do its job, and then land that point. When I'm crafting stories, I actually I use the arc when I'm thinking about telling a story or crafting a new snippet. And the first thing I do is I go to the end and I ask myself, what is the mic drop moment? What is the mic drop point that I'm trying to make? Like, why am I telling this story? What's the point of it? What does the mic drop look like? Then what I'll do is go back to the opening moves and say, how do I set the stage to set it up for the mic drop moment? What's a good opening for the mic drop? And then I fill in between. Now, like I said, they're all important, but I think opening and close are crucial. Another thing is, if you ever make a mistake in your storytelling, just ignore it. I've heard so many people, they'll say, oh, I made a mistake. Sammy does this all the time. Sammy Cox does this all the time. It's like, I made a mistake, and he points it out, right? And then he goes back 5 minutes and he's like, let me tell it again. Let me get a redo. Let me get it. Let me undo it and redo it. And don't do that. Don't point it out. People don't even know if it's a mistake. So don't point, just keep charging. So my advice is to keep charging forward. And keep charging forward through any errors you make, any stumbles. If you forget trust me, I forget my train of thought all the time. It's happening more and more to me. I try to charge through, and then really stick the landing and focus on that. So I want to stop now and see if anyone has any questions. And the next thing I want to do is I want to bring some of this storytelling stuff to Agile coaching. And then I'm going to give you a little time to work on your snippet library and talk about that. So that's where we're going. Anyone have any questions so far? A story to tell, a technique that you find useful, a story that you told and it went up badly. So patterns and anti-patterns, what good looks like and what's not. Phoenix Rising, anyone, give it a go. This is a safe, I hope this is a safe audience. That's psychologically safe, not capital SAF lowercase e safe.
Yeah, I have a
Anyone?
question for you.
Go ahead, Teresa.
So, one of my brothers in particular, and myself and one of my brothers I'm thinking of in particular, have a habit of sometimes starting to have a conversation with somebody, seeing them possibly not paying attention to what you're saying, and outcomes, long story short, and then you cut to the chase and you get to the end. And I noticed it in myself, and I started noticing it in one of my brothers, and it annoys the hell out of me because I wish he would take the time to tell his story, and I wish he would feel comfortable telling his story, or whatever the pressure is that.
Yeah.
And I feel
Yep.
it sometimes too. I don't know if that's because we have 11 children and we all used to talk at the same time, and so you had to, fight for your right to be part of the conversation. But long story short comes out. So do you have any recommendations on how to coach somebody who feels like maybe you're not paying attention, or they're not getting their point across, or something like that?
I mean, one thing that rose to me is I do a lot of public speaking and storytelling in public as part of presentations, and I see people that aren't interested in the audience. So I'll do a walkabout, Teresa. So if you're in a room, even in a virtual room, you can ask folks, just ask questions, be curious. Not be rude, but it's like, what's your reaction, Teresa? What was your reaction to the cookie, Oreo cookie, or you want Chips Ahoy, right? So, and you might use your humor. So I think engaging your audience, I do a lot of engagement, watching body contact. When I talk about targeting, do that. I might even call it out, not call out. I might generally say, I'm noticing that some people are tuned out. And some people have fallen asleep. I won't mention, but Teresa has fallen asleep over there. I even heard her nose crack on the desk. What can I do? So I might engage the audience. I might call it out. I might try to draw them in. I've even asked, like, what can I do to make it more interesting? Can I talk faster? I have New York Fast Talk that New Yorker Fast Talk that I can flip into that mode, or whatnot. The other thing, the reaction I have is we can model, right? So be a good listener, right? And ask people to tell their story. So storytelling isn't just us telling our stories. I think part of it is modeling. Like, one of the things I'm learning as an Agile coach, and I'm trying to retrain myself, is before I coach someone, a leader, I do a lot of leadership coaching. I try to find out what their story is. And so I ask them what their story is. I'm trying to build a relationship. Like, tell me about your childhood leading into your profession, to college. What was that about? I'm not coaching them at all. I'm actually trying to get to know them. And now I'm engaging. And if I engage in that relationship, I think it'll reciprocate back. So respectful listening and engagement can go both ways and can help with that. But it takes runway to do that. Anyone have a reaction? That was just 2 quick reactions I had. That's a great question. Any other questions?
I guess I have a reaction to
Oh, a reaction. I'll take
yeah,
anything. Go ahead, Sammy.
Teresa's question a little bit, because sometimes, and I'm really hoping that my partner won't listen to this, but I'm kind of like, just get to the point. You know, what are we talking about here? And just really want that end to come sooner rather than, you know, hearing lots of lead up.
I mean, one of the things I found, Sammy, and this might with Teresa, we need to train ourselves to be effective listeners. It's not about how fast we want. Someone told me decades ago that our human brain processes words slowly. So my ability to listen words is like 30% of my CPU. So I have 70% idle time that I can think about all kinds of other things. And part of that thinking is hurry it up, Sammy. I want you to speak faster to use up. But what I do to affect my listening, I take notes, for example, or I'll ask questions to engage, if that makes sense. So now what I'm doing, I'm slowing myself. Instead of me saying you have to speed up, Sammy, and that is an approach. I could say I need to slow myself down. And I need to listen more intently because I'm superficially listening. So to me, there's powerful listening skills and working on those listening skills to slow it down, because whether you like it or not, you're missing stuff. You're not paying attention you're listening maybe to just the words, and you're missing the emotional field. You're missing the body language, or you're misinterpreting it, or you're allowing your biases. Not you, I'm not picking on Sammy, but anyone. So if you can slow yourself down, I actually think that deep listening keeps me wonderfully entertained. I mean, watch the Jobs video intently. And it's not about the words. It's about there's so much richness there. But so work on your listening skills, I think. And what's happened is I've created better relationships. I mean, of course you could tell them, you say, get to the point. I'm going to give you, you can try this strategy. You have 5 seconds to get to the point. Otherwise, I'm going to check out and go play golf. But I don't know if that's a great relationship building and a great coaching or whatever. I don't know if that's what we want to be doing as Agilists. So anyone else? Cool. So let me go forward. There's this thing called the Agile. Now I'm treating you all as Agile coaches. Not really, as Agile coaching skills. There's this thing called the Agile Coaching Growth Wheel. If anyone's familiar with the Agile Coaching Competency Framework, Lisa Atkins, Michael Spades. I like to think of it as an X-wing model because I have an affinity to Star Wars. This is maybe the next evolution of frameworks or models. With respect to the Agile, so it's not replacing the ACCF, maybe augmenting it would be a way of thinking about it. It emerged around 2017, 18, and it's emerging in the space. The Scrum Alliance has a group that's working on it, a volunteer team that's working on it, and so I like to use this with a coaching backdrop to talk about weaving stories into your coaching and weaving them into your stances. Now, if half of you are saying, well, I don't do coaching, I'm a Scrum Master, well, then I would call you a coach as a Scrum Master. Or if some of you are product owners, well, I'm not a coach, I'm a product. I think, so don't look at the role, look at coaching competencies and coaching skills. And I think any role can benefit from increasing their coaching skills. So if that lens helps keep your attention. So I'm trying to get Sammy to pay attention. I don't know if it's going to work because he's way ahead of me, but I'm hoping to draw him in to say this works for me. This applies to Sammy independent of his role. It's just coaching skills. So, for example, self-mastery is one of the cool competencies in the wheel. It's the hub. And any of the coaching competencies, to me, self-mastery is like a foundation for facilitation. So, or self-mastery is a foundation for professional coaching. I think of them as a complement. Self-mastery to me is the inside-out view. Like, are you walking your talk view? So, how could we weave storytelling in order to support self-mastery? So this aligns perfectly with what I was talking about. Where do you come from? What was your family journey? What was your professional journey? What was your first job like? And you could be sharing this with a coaching client. If I'm a scrum master, I mean, again, I'm not saying you do this for hours on end, but share who you are with your team. Tell me about your childhood or education or experience in the military. What made you who you are? And self-mastery is not just you telling the story out, but asking folks to tell you their story so that you're building relationship and empathy. So I think the key thing with storytelling in self-mastery is it's dual directional. It's not just you telling. You might be modeling some of the behavior to then give permission or make safety for folks to tell you their stories. What keeps you up at night? What's the most valuable thing I can help you with? And could you put that in a story form? Tell me a story about, what the last coach, how did they help you? What was the best thing they did? And then just let that land. So weaving storytelling into coaching context for self-mastery. Connection, stories of how you've learned, counter stories when you failed to receive feedback, stories of how you become more empathetic over time, stories of your why. So this is the empathy and relationship. This is storytelling you to your clients, clients to you, engaging them, inviting them. And then this is more you connecting to others and using story form to do that. Don't just send someone your CV or your resume and say, or even a README file. There's folks that have like a README file, and there's nothing wrong with a README. It does give you insights, but it doesn't connect. It doesn't provide that nuance. It's like reading a user story and then having that user story. What's the most important part of the user story, everyone? The conversation around it. I think I've heard that. It's it's the amplification here. The conversation is the story. Again, storytelling. I wish more product owners and teams would talk about their user stories, not as a requirement artifact, but as a fireside chat. And that they sort of discovered it themselves. I'm not talking about like small stories, but I'm talking about like meaningful epics and things like that. They're really worth a story to connect to, so folks can envision it. You can use stories in mentoring. Stories of your mentoring, mentor and mentee, learning journey, stories of what's worked for you and hasn't. Like sharing your stories of how you've learned to do things, how you've learned to coach, how you've learned. Sasha talked about being a developer. How has he learned to write solid code? Has he done unit testing or TDD? And he could talk about his stories. Like he was resistant. It would be a beautiful story for Sasha to talk about. 20 years ago, I thought TDD was something related to bathrooms and plumbing. And then I discovered I discovered this beauty of writing tests first. Then I let it go, right? I got a little lazy. I switched companies and then I revisited it. So he can talk about his stories in that journey. He might share that with a mentee in setting the stage for that. And again, he's not trying to tell the TDD, the mentee, to do it. He's trying to create some inspiration, some curiosity on their part. Story that maps to your mentee's challenges and growth opportunities. Connect to them. Meet them where they are. Stories around meeting people where they are, if you will. I'm not meeting you. I'm sharing a story about me, but that's not important. Where are you at in this? And then really sort of ask questions around that story. Coaching. A lot of times when we're doing professional coaching, I think a lot of clients don't know what professional coaching is. So for example, if any of you are coaches, you've heard of powerful questions. And anyone that's ever heard there's questions. It's not solving the client's problems or challenges. It's the client uncovering things so the client uncovers their own answers. What if you've never explained that to the client, to a leader, to a team? You might tell a story of what coaching is and what it isn't. You might tell a story of a coaching client where you asked too many questions or you didn't ask enough questions. And what you're doing is you're sort of explaining the boundary conditions of what good coaching looks like and what it's not, or managing their expectations. And you can use story for that. The power of a metaphor with some examples, right? I think metaphors are incredibly powerful as professional coaching, but again, it can be scary to a client, like, a tiger metaphor. They may think that I'm crazy. They may fire me. It's like they're making me a pink slip. It's like Bob Galen's talking about, panda bears and tigers. What's up with that? But if I set the stage of why and talk about the power of a metaphor, maybe share a story of an impact that a metaphor had on me, or a metaphor that had on another client without using their names, just sort of generically talking about it. Advising. Another stance in the wheel is providing advice or consulting. There's schools of agile coaches that think consulting or advising is bad. I probably lean into the school that says occasionally advising and consulting, if it serves the client, is not a bad thing. It can be if it serves the client's agenda. So you can tell stories that are similar without. I rarely, I shouldn't say never, I rarely tell a client what to do, but I give them option stories. I've seen this work. Let me share a story of how SAFE worked in the real world. There was a team in the Arctic. In the whole world, there was just one team, and they were struggling drilling a hole in the ice and trying to project manage that. And they installed SAFE as a way to articulate. No, I'm just kidding. I'm making this up, everyone. That was a lie. But I could talk about situations, and I saw it work in this context. And then I've seen it not work in a lot of other contexts. What do you think? Failure, don't do it. I learned this the hard way. Share. Sometimes as coaches, we can share some of our most catastrophic things. And that might provide advice for our clients. Indirect hearsay stories. You know what? I don't have a story for that. But Larry Apke, oh my God, he tells this really boring story. Can I share it with you? But I think it's relevant because I mean, I trust Larry. He's incredibly wise, and he has an experience that's different. Let me characterize that for you and share it with you, and then we'll see how we both react to that. Right? Maybe there's some lessons learned that we can learn from that. We can tease that apart. So advising. So just weaving, what I'm suggesting is in your role, if you're in a coach role, a scrum master role, leadership role, product role, weaving some of your stories in, right? At some level, can you effectively use storytelling for relationship building? What I want to do now is I want to, and I'll come back for questions. So jot down some questions, but I want to demand, not demand. That was, I lose my agile mindset sometimes. I get so prescriptive. I want to invite, that's a much better term. I would like to invite everyone to take 3 minutes and grab a piece of paper, and I want you to jot down some story snippets. Do I have a slide here for this? Yeah. And we're not going to do 10 minutes. I want you to, because we're not doing breakouts, but I want you to just at your desk, we're going to take 3 minutes. I'm going to time it. And I want you to start building a story snippet repository. And things you don't need to write. I don't want you to write out, entire story. We're not creating a book, but you might capture a central idea or a theme, a message you're trying to convey or you need to convey. You might capture a quick opening and close, and then move on to the next one and the next one. And I'd like you to capture as many of those as you can. Stories of success, stories of failure, stories of why, stories of teams, stories of leaders, story of scaling success, wherever you want to find them. I don't care where you mine them. But this is the start of a story snippet repository. So everyone take 3 minutes for that. Let me set my clock here. And you can turn your cameras off. But please do that. It's important. Stories don't pop out of thin air. You need some thought. There needs to be some structure, some ideation. So someone just joined us. We're just doing a little breakout, capturing some story ideas. So we'll just leave it at that. You have about 1.5 minutes left. Don't just focus on professional. How about some personal stories, some connection stories for yourselves? What's your why? Why stories, history stories, legacy stories. What have you left behind? How about a story of hope? What do you hope for? What do you hope to do? I hope to end this workshop in about 10 minutes because it's past my bedtime. Got 30 seconds, wrap up those snippets. All right, if everyone could come back, whoever wants to come back on camera, please do so. So I just want to see how that went. Anyone have anything to share? So any questions from the coaching wheel and any observations, thoughts, questions, anything from the snippet library? No? Yes? So a final point for me, I think it takes reflection and practice. So I wanted to leave you with, I don't think you become a good storyteller over time. It takes a lot of practice. Uh, there's things like you can join Toastmasters. I don't know if you're familiar, any of you are familiar with Toastmasters. That's a wonderful place to refine your storytelling and to get feedback. I mean, it's not just the story, it's and do it in a safe environment. If any of you are in communities of practice, I would say I would invite you to create some space and time in the community of practice to tell stories. It's a Scrum Master community of practice. Try to weave that in every once in a while, product owner. Ask clients for feedback. Reflect on the effect of your stories. Personal reflection can be very powerful. And then relentlessly find those ideas. I use journaling, and my journal is a reflection place for me. But the other thing that I capture, one of the other things I capture in my journal is story ideas. Like if I observe a team, oh, there's something, Bob Galen leaped a tall building in that team. Oh, I could use that as a motivational story of what good looks like for a scrum master in a team, or for a team helping a team member out, onboarding. Oh my gosh, there's a wonderful onboarding story there, right? I need to change the names to protect the innocent, and maybe I can embellish it a little bit, right? Put it on Disneyland. I can set the stage that it's a Disneyland team and something like that. So just note that down, and then I'll work on that. But it's capturing those ideas that you can leverage. I think if you don't do that, you'll be empty on your stories. The other thing, remember, stick the landing. Those drop the mic moments are incredibly important. The other final point I'd like to offer to everyone is, if you're walking around and if your story holster is empty, you're making a huge mistake. You need to find stories. For example, in an interview, how many of you have ever interviewed for a job? I hope all hands go up, virtual, right? And I hope, so you can answer questions or you can tell stories. And I think stories can be incredibly compelling in an interview situation. If you're a consultant and you're just meeting a new client and you're trying to make an impression, stories can be an effective way to create that initial relationship. If you're walking around and are largely empty, or you're just dealing with Jira or just sort of data, I remember the brain activation. Stories are a way to connect and build relationships, to build trust, to target. So I think you should have some stories that are handy, that you work on. The other thing is, it takes time to retarget them. It takes practice to get skilled at retargeting an audience and play with that. But building that story repository is incredibly important. Having them ready. I actually think of pulling them out. I know it's not a gun, but it's a story. So I have a story holster. I have a vision. I have an imaginary story holster around my waist. And when necessary, I pull out just the right story snippet and I deliver it. And if the holster is empty, I can't do that. So I'm filling that up. I need to be able to sense and respond and pull them out at the right moment. Sometimes I make mistakes. They're not always perfect, but I learn and grow in that aspect over time. So with that, reactions, feedback for me. Otherwise, I think I'm going to just close and stop sharing and see if we want to have any discussion. Otherwise, we can have wine.
Bob, there
Anyone?
was a question in the chat about the video with Steve Jobs.
Yeah,
Referring to a specific video, is it possible to have a link?
I think there's a link on that PDF in the slide.
Yeah, but since you are presenting, people cannot click on this link. Do you
Well,
mind?
I'm going to no. I'm going to give you. So one, I'll give you the PDF, but two, I'll just cut that and I'll put it in chat too.
Thank you.
No problem. So, like we said, I'm going to make sure I get people a copy, or I get you a copy of the PDF. I did that.
That would be great. I would be happy to.
And then there's a link there. Okay, everyone.
Feel,
And Jobs is, again, I know Jobs is not, from a leadership perspective, he has some warts and issues. I don't want to get into that, but as a communication artist, and there's other folks. So TED Talks are a great way. Some of the leading TED Talks that's really what I'm trying to say. It's not I'm a fan of Jobs. I'm a fan of great communicators. And I think it's worthwhile looking at videos and looking at how others tell their stories for you then to find your center as a storyteller. There's tools and tactics out there that can be incredibly effective, and just watch and what's working for you, right? It's not just an esoteric judgment. It's what evokes something in you, and then look at how that unfolded. Anything else? So I have a question for everyone. Was this bunk or important? I think it's crucial, but y'all, right? In any role, we're change artists. Is this an agile group, Sasha? That's some
Yeah.
agile kind of thing. Yeah,
Yes.
we're change agents. We're in some of the toughest work on the planet Earth. How do we show up? How do we influence? Story. I'm offering to you all to really refine your stories. Look around your organization. Find the storytellers in your organization. Learn from them there. If there are no storytellers, start elbowing people in your organization because you need some of that. You need to find some of that. It can be incredibly exhilarating in the organization. I find that it's one of the keys to my success as a coach. And I'm not a great storyteller, but I'm pretty persistent at trying at working on the craft. All right, thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.